I don't want to give away too much from this coming Sunday, but I also want to try to connect some dots. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 12 tonight. Luke chapter 12. And let me just say a thing about that before we get into it. So you know, the past 3 Sundays, we've been in chapter 6 in Matthew on Sunday morning. And if you remember, those 3 were related because the first verse in Matthew 6 talks about being on your guard so that you don't practice your righteousness in front of people so you can be seen, but because that's not what God wants us to do. It's not about us. And then he gives those 3 examples, talking about giving, and then talking about praying, and then this past Sunday talking about fasting, and how that same rule, Matthew 6:1, applies to those 3 different principles. All those things, we're to do them, but we're not to point attention to ourselves. That was the idea. But you remember, and here's the connection point. I'm gonna make this connection, and then we'll talk about it Sunday, and then tonight will be kind of separate. So you remember what Jesus said at the end of each of those sections, the past 3 weeks? At the end, each one, he said the same thing. Don't do this in front of people to be seen, but do this in secret. And then he said this statement, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Right? He said that at the end of each one. So you're giving, God knows what you're doing, he'll reward you. Don't call attention to it. When you pray, don't pray out, try to be seen by people so they can hear you praying. Go into your room, close your door, pray in secret, then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you fast, don't make yourself look like you're fasting. Make it look just the opposite. Try to make it hard to see that you're doing that, because it's not for other people, it's between you and God. Right? That's the whole point. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Now, isn't this interesting? I'm going to just connect this, and then we're going to get into our text. 3 times Jesus said, here's the kind of reward you should be looking for. The one that God, your Father, gives you because of what he sees that other people don't see. That was the whole point. That's the reward you're looking for. Now, the very next verse, our passage this coming Sunday, Matthew 6:19 through 34. The very next thing he says is, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. And then verse 21 he says, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's just talking about 3 different times about rewards. What kind of reward you're looking for. Not an earthly reward, a heavenly reward. And then he says, don't store up treasures on earth. So it's kind of, that's where the connection is between the past 3 weeks and where we're going this Sunday. Okay? So that's the connection. Now, tonight, kind of as a midweek bridge, Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. We're talking about being rich toward God. Being rich toward God. Now, it's an important question in this text that's kind of beneath the surface, and I don't want to miss this key area of application. And here's the kind of a question that overarches this text. Why does money and the way we use it matter so much when it comes to spiritual things? Why does that matter? Money things, financial things. Why is that even important when we're talking about spiritual things? So I'm going to try to illustrate something. And I've made this analogy before, but I'm going to do it again. I think it's helpful. So, have any of you ever flown on an airplane? Okay. And airplane tickets oftentimes are not cheap, right? It's like a game you play. You try to buy a plane ticket if you can. There's studies that says if you buy a plane ticket this many days prior to your trip, it's like a sweet spot for finding the cheapest. It's like 51 days before you travel, something like that. It's like supposed to be supposed to be the cheapest time. But anyway, plane tickets are usually more expensive, certainly, than traveling on the ground. You know, of course, with gas prices, not so much anymore, right? But because it costs a lot more to fill up your vehicle. But typically, a trip like if I was to fly from Columbia to Raleigh, or I was to drive from Columbia to Raleigh, it'd be cheaper just hop in the truck and drive, right? But you never thought about why plane tickets are more expensive? Like some of the things that go into that? Well, you got a plane, first of all, and so you got jet fuel. That costs a lot of money. But you're not the only one traveling. You might fly 100, 150, 200 people to a location, right? So that costs a lot more money. And you got all their stuff, right? All the bags and stuff. And so it's a lot bigger operation. And you're not dealing with the same amount of traffic, you know, because there's other planes in the sky, certainly, and that air traffic controller is one of the most stressful jobs there is, trying to keep all the planes straight and away from each other. But typically, when you're in a plane, you typically fly pretty much A to B, right? Pretty much straight line, usually. And so that helps. In the time aspect, you're going a lot faster. And I know a lot of the planes now, they have the little screens in the seats in front of you, and you can watch a movie or listen to music or what. And you can also pull up a map. This is what I like to do. I like to watch my progress, you know, because it shows the little plane on the map, and it shows you here you are, here you're going. It shows you how far you are to your destination. But you know what else it shows you? It shows you the outside air temperature, and it shows you the speed. I love watching the speed, because once we get on up there to about 30,000 feet, we're going 500 miles an hour. And you look outside and you think, gosh, it sure doesn't look like you're going 500 miles an hour. Well, that's because you're so far above everything. You know, and then when you start to get lower, stuff just starts going by. And that's kind of neat. But here's an example. I'm going to do a quick comparison. If I wanted to leave Wagner and I wanted to go to Seattle, Washington, here's what I'd have to do. I'd have two options. First, I could gas up the truck, throw my bags in the back, and head out. And that's a little more than 2,800 miles from here to Seattle, Washington, cross country. So here's what I'd have to do. I'd get on I-20, and I'd go to Atlanta, and I'd pick up 75, go north to Chattanooga, get on 24 through Nashville, then I'd get on 57, southern Illinois, then I'd turn left on 64 to St. Louis, which that turns into I-70, which goes to Kansas City, and then I'd get on I-29, which would take me all the way to South Dakota, and then I'd hang a left on I-90, and it would change names, but that one road, when I take a left on I-90, that's going to take me the last 1,500 miles straight into downtown Seattle. And if I did that, if I averaged 10 hours a day, I'd get there in 4 days. Okay? Now, I wouldn't have, you could drive more than that and just try to push through, sleep very little. But if I drove 10 hours a day for 4 days, I would get there. And that's also assuming that I would sleep in my truck for 3 nights and eat sandwiches that I made and not spend any money on a motel or food. But if I wanted to sleep in an actual bed and take a shower and eat real food, then I have to add about another $400. So it would cost me, if I took that truck and drove, it would cost me $600 in fuel. And then if I wanted to sleep in a bed and eat, it cost me $400 more. So it cost me $1,000 to get there. But then you know what? It would cost me $1,000 to get back. Because that's, one way. Now, what if I flew? If I hopped on a plane in Columbia and flew to Seattle, for about $1,100, $1,200, I could get a flight from Columbia to Seattle, and I could be there in 8 hours. And that would include my trip back. So it'd be half the cost. And I wouldn't lose all that time. Right? But here's the thing. how do I decide which one of those to do? If I'm dead set on I've got to go to Seattle, Washington, how do I make the decision? What factors do I consider? What would you consider if you had to decide what you were going to do? You had to go. Are you going to drive or fly? Okay. Yeah. What else? Right? Because in the plane, you're gaining time, but you're not seeing all the sights. You're losing the experience. Okay. Who's going with you? That's right. Is this just a solo trip that I'm going to be bored in the vehicle for 4 days, or am I going to have a couple people with me doing a conversation, or joint, like a family experience or something? Weather, certainly. Oh yeah, because round trip you're putting 5,600 miles on a vehicle, and so that's right. So you got to think about safety. Right, because statistically, the plane is safer, but you don't hear about the planes crashing all that much. But when you do, a bunch of people die, right? So there's that. So then here's what you have to consider: time, money, safety, company, other expenses, unseen expenses. But you know what else you have to consider? This is subtle. Control. Do I need to be in control of my travel? Or am I okay letting somebody else do it? And that's a bigger issue than we might realize. Because what we do, how we decide, what we make, what decision we make, it says a little bit of something about how we value different things. And so they communicate the priorities of what we value. Because if we choose to drive, even though it costs more, takes longer, maybe it's because we have people with us and we want to share that time. Maybe we value the experience more than we value those other things. Or maybe we are... we have to be in control, so or maybe we're just afraid to fly. And it's like, I don't care how much it costs. I'm not getting in a plane. I'm getting in the car, and then we'll go. Right? But there's all kind of different things to consider. But here's the hard truth about all that silly little analogy. We will always make the time to do what we want to do. That's true. No matter how much we don't necessarily appreciate that truth, that's the truth. We will either make a way or we will make an excuse. That's just how it is. And when we look back on things, that's what we have to consider. So here's how that works into reward, treasure. What do we value? What are our priorities? Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. And here's what the Bible tells us. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" Then he said to them, here's this story, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared?' So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now this is a different parable, different kind of parable in the way Jesus relays this information based on what has been asked of him. You look at the first 3 verses, and somebody's asking Jesus to take some action on his behalf. He wants somebody to intervene in this issue with a family inheritance, and so he says, hey, tell my brother to do such and such, right? So what kind of attitude does that portray? How would you describe? Just give me some words. Verse 13, the person who says that to Jesus, how would you describe that attitude? Jealous, okay. Greedy, yeah. That's a good one. Entitled. Just kind of selfish, kind of demanding, right? Hey, Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance. And Jesus is not trying to get involved. He's not interested in this situation here. But you can tell that the person who asked Jesus to do this, he's not interested. He says, divide, but he's not interested in equity. You know, he's trying to gain an advantage. He wants Jesus to get involved so he can manipulate for his own good. So Jesus is like, I'm not getting involved in this, because Jesus is clear on his purpose, his ministry. That's not what he's there to do. He came to bring people to God, not to bring property to people. Right? That's not what Jesus was about. He's trying to point people toward the Father. So he issues this warning, verse 15, beware, take care, be on your guard, protect yourself against, Jimmy, you said it, greed. You said he sounded greedy, right? So he says, beware, be on your guard, protect yourself against every form of greed. Now here's a beautiful truth at the end of verse 15. Our lives do not consist in the abundance of our possessions. That right there is a beautiful truth. And I'll tell you, you can go anywhere in just about any town and just y'all ever people watch? Y'all ever do that? Just kind of, it can be fun. Just watch people. Just watch and observe. You don't even have to say anything. Just kind of sit over in the corner, just watch. But here's what you can do. If you watch people enough, you'll find out, usually after not very long, to some degree, you'll find out what's important to them. Right? Because you can see somebody who might be driving an $80,000 truck and living in a house that costs less than his truck. So what's of value to him? It certainly is not the place where he lives. It's what he's driving. That's more important to him, right? Huh? Right, yeah, because he can't drive his house around, right? We can drive that truck around so more people will see it. That's right. But you get to see what's important to people. And Jesus says, please watch out and protect yourself against, he says, every form of greed, because he doesn't want people to be fooled to believe that lie that the more stuff I have. You ever seen that? I think it was a bumper sticker originally. It says, whoever dies with the most toys wins, something like that. You ever seen that? I saw there was another one that came out after that, was as a response. It said, whoever dies with the most toys still dies. Like that. It don't matter. It doesn't matter. And here's the truth that underlies that. You ever seen a hearse with a U-Haul attached to it? You can't take it with you. It's not going to go with you wherever you go. It's going to be gone. So our life doesn't consist in the abundance of our possessions. So beware against greed. But the second thing that Jesus does is he tells this parable. And this is a beautiful illustration of this warning in verse 15. He tells a story of a rich man who had a property that produced plentifully. And the land produced. The man couldn't take credit because God gave the growth, but he was still enjoying the harvest, so to speak. So the man asked the wrong question, so he came up with the wrong answer. See, the snag is he had not taken into account the life of the world to come, where his earthly possessions won't be of any use to him. So a better response should have been something like this. Because you see what he says. When he says he's reasoning to himself in verse 17. What should I do? I have no place to store all my stuff. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down these barns. I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll store all my grain and my goods. Then I'll just kick back, eat, drink, and be merry. Right? But maybe he should have said something like this. God, this is all yours. You made my fields prosper. You made me. So show me how I can respond to this with my riches here that you've given me, that I can demonstrate that you mean more to me than all this stuff. Wouldn't that be a better attitude? God, I appreciate the blessing, but you're more valuable to me. How can I show people that you're more valuable to me? But instead, he decided to expand his storage so he could kind of take it easy and just live it up. Now, here's an interesting point for us, and kind of an earthly application. Is there anything wrong with having a good retirement plan? Of course not. Of course not. That's wise, right? That's good stewardship, right? Nothing wrong with that. But the problem with this rich man in this parable was the selfish nature of his retirement plan. You know, when we get to heaven, God's not going to ask us how low we got our golf handicap in our retirement. He's not going to ask us how much better we got at bass fishing during those retirement years. He's not going to ask us about, did you finally kill that big buck you were hunting after? Once you got retired, once you could really go out, did you finally have some good success hunting? No, he's not going to be concerned with any of that. What if in our retirement we had this thought pass through our minds? Well, now I'm retired now. Man, I wonder what I can do for the Lord now. I mean, I got more time on my hands. I got resources. Wonder how I can serve the Lord and advance the gospel and reach people for Jesus better now that I'm in this position. Wonder how that would work. But I want you to notice something very interesting about this particular fella. Just in 3 verses, from verse 17 to 19, the word I or me or my is used 11 times in 3 verses. It's all about him. He's not given any thought to God, much less anyone else. It's not about anybody but himself. That's all he's worried about. He's not concerned to use his wealth wisely. He's trying not to serve God nor to help people. He's not even concerned to have a richer, fuller life for himself. He's just concerned with self-indulgence. Because he says, I'll just kick up my feet, eat, drink, and be merry. I have all my stuff. So I can go out and look at it and then go back. You know, that's basically what he's saying. So how does God respond to the foolishness of this man? Verse 20. You know things are about to get serious whenever the Bible says, but God said, it's about to get tough. He basically says, you're a fool for thinking this way. This is so foolish to act in this way, to process the events that have happened in your life in this way and come to this conclusion. And by the way, Warren Wiersbe said, God is not impressed with our money. God's not impressed with anything we have. You know what God's impressed with? Obedience. He's impressed when we surrender and we follow, and we just glory in the fact that we have a relationship with Him through Christ. So the really stupid thing was the rich man's easy, this assurance he had that his future was all in control. You know, he just thought he had it all planned out. Does anybody here know what's going to happen tomorrow? Well, this fella had it all plotted out, right? Now, does that mean it's wrong to have a plan? Of course not. Plans are good, right? But you ever heard that saying? Man plans and God laughs. Yeah. So what do we do with our plans? God, this is what I was thinking, but whatever you say. This is what I was thinking that might be a good thing to do, but whatever you say is what I'll do. He was assured that the future was in His control when God said to him, "This night your soul is required." God requires your soul. So who will possess all these things that you have valued as supremely important over everything else? Who's going to have it all now? You know, I think about, I hesitate to say this because I know we're live streaming and it'll be a record of it, but, you know, I think about stuff like, silly stuff like hunting rifles and things, you know, like, who's going to get that when I'm gone? Jimmy, you want me to write that in? All right, let me make a note. Jimmy Leach wants that when I'm gone. Okay, just whichever one, right? Okay, but I worry about little stupid stuff like that. You know, who's going to get that? But here's the point. I don't know who'll get it, but I know who won't have it. Me. I won't have anything. I have Jesus, and that's more important than anything else, right? And so I don't have to worry about possessions and all the things that seem to be supremely valuable while we're on earth. When we cross from death to life, we're not going to be concerned with any of this. All these things are temporary. They're fleeting. They ultimately don't matter, even though we might have supreme value placed on them now. And so then Jesus explains the meaning of the parable here at the very end. This is the fate of the person who values earthly possessions more than God. Verse 21. This is the man who stores up treasure for himself. And what did we just talk about the past 3 weeks, and then what we'll talk about this Sunday? What kind of reward should we really be seeking? It's not an earthly reward. It's not a human reward. It's a heavenly reward. It's the reward that only our Father in heaven can give us. That's the bridge between the first 18 verses in Matthew 6 and then verse 19 to 20 and 21. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. So what kind of reward are we looking for? Do we really thrive on compliments of people, pats on the back, recognition? Somebody better notice me or I'm not going to do this. You know, as long as people can see me doing it, I'll do it. That's not the right attitude. Not the godly attitude. So there's an equal and opposite perspective here working in this type of person that's in this parable. They lay up treasure for themselves, and so they're not rich toward God. So you can't do both. Either you're rich toward God or you're rich toward yourself. But you can't be both at the same time. And that's kind of the point that Jesus is making with this parable. This mindset, because remember he said beware, be on your guard, protect yourself against every form of greed. Basically saying protect yourself against seeking the earthly reward, the human reward. Protect yourself. Be on your guard. Because here's the thing that's the types of things that are at the root of this mindset: selfishness and self-centeredness. If all I'm worried about is myself, then I can't be worried about God, and I can't be worried about anybody else. Which means, one, I'm not going to be right with God, and two, I'm not going to be sensitive to the needs of others around me. So I'm never going to care about what anybody else has going on. So I'm never going to have that perspective that we're going to see when we get to Matthew 9, when Jesus is looking at the crowds and he's having compassion on them because they're cast down and they're hopeless and helpless and they're like sheep without a shepherd, and they need help. And he sees them and sees their needs. We're never going to see that if we're always just worried about ourselves. Warren Wiersbe, again, I'll quote something he said. What does it mean to be rich toward God? It means to acknowledge gratefully that everything we have comes from God, and then make an effort to use what he gives us for the good of others and the glory of God. You know, I've known some people in my life thus far, a couple people in particular, but one that I'm thinking of right now, who everything I know about him, he's just one of the most generous people I know. And you know what's interesting about this particular fella? Is he's one of the wealthiest people I know. I mean, at one time, I think he sold one of them now, but at one time he had like 2 different just huge homes on the lake, you know, just and because he wanted to go to this one, but he hadn't sold this one yet, and he had both of them at the same time, and that was like no big deal. You know, he's got plenty of resources, but at the same time, he freely just gave and served and helped in any way he could. He looked for opportunities to give and to help folks. And I honestly still think, why did God choose to bless him financially so much the way he has, the way he continues to do? And I can't come up with another explanation other than because he knows he can trust him with it. Because he's generous. He gives. He doesn't hoard. I mean, he's got nice stuff, but it's clear that he wants to be rich toward God. And it's like he's just got more than he needs, so he just gives and gives and gives. And I think, well, that's why he keeps receiving. Because he gives. He's so generous with what God blesses him with. And so I guess all that to say, what is the true message here, the final application that Jesus really gives, it's ultimately a warning. It's like a cautionary tale. This is what it looks like to store up treasure for yourself and not be rich toward God. And that's an example of what not to do. Right? The clear message of this parable is, this man had some blessings and he didn't handle it right, and this is what happened. God came to him and said, how foolish you've been. I blessed you with all that. Your soul is required tonight. Now, all this stuff, it's not going to be yours anymore. It's going to be somebody else's, but not yours. That's how it is for someone who is trying to lay up treasure for themselves and not be rich toward God. There's no cheerful generosity, and there's no sense of how can I use what God has given me to help other people. That's the biblical attitude. So what is it that we need to do? How can we try to put this into practice and apply it in our own lives? Well, basically, it's a mindset. And I wrote some things down here. I don't think I'm going to read all that, but I think the most practical thing for us to consider is with everything we're doing, everything we have, whatever God chooses to lay in front of us, what's the point of it all? And I believe it's this. God, you gave me this. So how can I use whatever it is you gave me to make it real clear to whoever might be watching that I value Jesus more than whatever this stuff is? Jesus is my supreme treasure. Jesus is the most important to me. If that means that whatever you give me, I figure out a way to channel it and to leverage it for the advancement of the kingdom or the glory of God. Well, however I can do that, or opportunities you give me, or time. Maybe it's health, maybe it's time, maybe it's resources, maybe it's relationships. But whatever it is, how can I use this opportunity to make it clear that Jesus is my treasure? Because I'm not trying to lay up treasure for myself. I'm trying to be rich toward God. And so that's what I want. If anybody happens to be paying attention to me and watching what I do and seeing how I handle something, what do I want them to go away thinking? And this is it. Well, man, I don't know much about him, but he loves Jesus. I mean, really, that's really what it boils down to. We want to live our lives, make decisions, use our resources, do whatever we can in our lives to have people to draw that conclusion about us. Well, I don't know them that well, but it seems like they love Jesus. You know, that's about the nicest thing anybody could ever say about you, is they love Jesus. We're rich toward God. And here's the little underlying secret. If we do that, there's nothing that God won't provide if we need it. That means there's nowhere in the Bible that says God will give you everything you want. Not a thing. But He'll give you what you need. And we just sometimes have a hard time differentiating between what truly is a need and what we just want. God, the Bible says, I was young and now I am old, and I have never seen God's children begging for bread. Never seen the righteous forsaken. And I bet some of you could probably testify. Be rich toward God. Let's pray.